kick in. There it is. Okay, let me quickly start over again. Good morning, everyone. I've just started the recording, so there's absolutely nothing that you have missed. Just the normal that we always do is please turn your camera and your mic off. If you want to raise your hand and speak, then unmute your mic so we all can hear you. Ms. Mavuso will be monitoring the chat room and she will convey the chats to me so that I can deal with if we are of a mind that they are perhaps of a collective enough nature. Okay, I understand that you have another session today at 1 o'clock dealing with the Invigilator app. Yeah, I am very fortunate in that I have Ms. Diko and Ms. Mavuso to take the responsibility on them to explain to you what is actually going to happen on the day of the exam. But the first impact it has already had is that we reduced the number of questions from 50 to 45, because I think the application of the Invigilator Act is also something that will in fact take a bit of your time. All right, there's nothing we can do about the Invigilator app and its application. It is just one of those things the university is steaming ahead. All right. Okay, I have in front of me a collated report of all the responses that we received, and some of them I find rather perplexing. For instance, past paper practice discussions. What about it? That's what we've been doing. As far as I know, we dealt with certain questions and so on. And here's another wonderful one. Summary of everything. The reason why I'm giggling is there is a very strong assumption behind remarks like this that that somehow or other, if you learn something, you can actually reduce it and reduce it and reduce it until it's just a few words or a key word, and that is the way it is. But yeah, unfortunately, academia doesn't work like that. It is not essentially a reductive process, certainly not conceptually, and also is very worrying what everything may refer to. Then I see the author of this request is in the meeting. Can we please get the memos for assignment 1, 2, 3? Yeah, I'm very worried. I mean, what is a memo? Are you talking about a marking rubric, whatever the case may be? Whatever it is, I mean, how do you provide a memo for multiple choice questions? It's as simple as that. And as far as assignment 2 is concerned, you received comment to the extent that it will be helpful for you to understand the material. So I fail to see why ticking that box is somehow or the other good didactic or pedagogic practice. In fact, I don't think so. Then someone has said regarding assignment 2, how we should have written the essay, for what purpose? You are not going to write an essay in the exam. Then in bold letters, the Butcher Boys artwork. What about it, I wonder? questions which will most likely come out of the exam from the articles and how we can go around tackling them. Okay, I think I think we've done that last week by suggesting a certain ranking order of why certain e-reserves and other sections are more important than others, and perhaps that you should really be focusing on them with more specific intent than on the others. And so what questions can come out of these articles are potentially infinite, I would imagine. But then it would also involve a great deal of hair splitting, which I don't think we are really trying to do just yet. So let me use this question or this request made to sort of go through again about which of the e-reserves you are what's the word, encouraged to really master very well. Now let me start off by saying is that art history, understanding art and art theory is is a specialist practice, but it is not a specialist body of knowledge. What I mean by that is the more general knowledge you can bring to the artwork and to the experience of art, the better it would be for you. Now, I have never been able to find out how do you teach general knowledge, or how do you get people to improve their level of general knowledge. And it is one of those very urgent things that need to be done, and yet I am still to this day to be surprised to read anywhere in a government policy statement that one of the aims of the education system in this country is to get the general population to be more knowledgeable. A qualification does not mean that. The whole point of this little digression is to say, yes, I will list for you absolutely pointedly which of those e-reserves and others are more important than others, but it does not mean that your understanding of these artworks and the issues will not be improved by reading all the e-reserves. In other words, what I'm really saying is you should read all of them because all of them will contribute to your understanding. And I think the reason why I so strongly make this point is, in fact, if we look at the discussion the last time where there was a number of mistakes and faults that was picked up from the other multiple choice questions, and I think that the rectification that we received, and I'm very grateful for that, because sometimes you can get so involved in your own things you don't really spot the obvious, is really informed by students who really have understood most of the reading well and who could then start really engaging with the smaller or secondary detail, not secondary in importance, but as I say, the secondary detail of the artworks and so on, and that sort of brought to me it into perspective. Okay, so and I think the module is designed in this way. The first important thing that you, the first important section that you should do, and you should start your exam preparation with this, is to restudy study unit 1 in the study guide, where we discuss Barrett's guidelines. Now, as I've said many times, it's not so much knowledge as it is as it is an attempt to give you a sort of a hands-on practical manual of what do you do when you are in front of a work of art. Okay, and let me qualify that, a contemporary work of art. The works of art that we deal with in this module can all be approached with great fruit and benefit if you follow the guidelines of Barrett. So Barrett is not theory, okay? That's the important thing. If it is anything, Barrett is the practice of art criticism that is at the root of all engagement, of all engagements with artworks. And you can take it back into the art of the past as well, although it wasn't really conceived as doing that. Okay. So, study unit 1 from the study guide. All right. There will be a number of questions of the 45. Will deal specifically with the study guide and what Barrett says and so on and so on. Okay. Then from there on, we move to the Butcher Boys. And I think last time we made it patently clear that the two most important articles is the chapter from a book by John Peffer and the article by Tenley Bick. Okay. Now there are other articles that are mentioned. If you master Bick, you have mastered Mercer, because they're very similar. They use different terminology, but they really try and come to the same basic idea, which I think is better encapsulated by Bick's formulation of abjection than by Mercer's formulation of grotesque. But that's just a preference that I'm mentioning, but they are very, very, very similar. Now, clearly the chapter from a book by Peffer deals with how do you understand the Butcher Boys and some of other South African works. How do you understand that as part of a history of South African art during the 1970s and the 1980s? That's really what he was about. That's the end of apartheid that he is really referring to. And Peffer is trying to argue for a specific place of the Butcher Boys within that kind of a history. And that history is the history of figuration. And it has, when you look at Jane Alexander specifically, her exploration of figuration has got two distinct sources. The one is an international one, where there was a reaction against abstraction and yeah, one can say abstraction and a move back to depicting the human body, but they were trying to explore the human body as something. Now this is where it gets complicated, where it can be the repository of virtually anything, but they were trying to exclude all these associations, symbolic and metaphorical associations that we have with the human body and so on and so on. The artist by the surname of Siegel are constantly referred to, and you can Google him and you can see he makes these figures that are not communicating, to put it simply. They're just there. They're not just objects. They clearly are strong human references, but they are simply there. It's a sort of a bare existential statement and so on. And there's much of that still in the Butcher Boys, and we can see that is the core idea that Jane Alexander used in order for her to arrive at the Butcher Boys. And how did she arrive at the Butcher Boys is something that is explained by the article of Bick, where she has those precursors. In other words, what shall one say? Call them. Yeah, precursor is good enough. In her article, and I'm referring here specifically to Domestic Angel. Okay, that's on page 32. I'm paging through it. And then to a horrific figure called Untitled. Yep. And then Municipal Crucifix. Now, what you need to understand about these images is that, remember what I've said about one of the sources of figuration is how do you communicate via the human body? But how do you communicate not by really using the human body per se as the subject of the artwork, but also because there is such a strong identification built into the depiction of the human body, a strong identification by the viewer and the spectator, that certain things are simply unavoidable. And anything that Alexander encountered on this exploration of figuration that tilted the response into a definite reaction, in other words, that confined its meaning and its messages, she apparently discarded, and that's why when we look at the Butcher Boys, the first and the last impression that you have of it, that it is very ambivalent, and it seems to bring together responses that donate opposites and so on. And we've already spoken at length about that. Now, when you look at Domestic Angel, it is clearly a female nude figure with wings of purportedly an angel. So the idea of the purity, the saintliness of women mixed in, with a kind of a sexual titillation and so on, and it's an important work because it says that the notion of sexuality, or bodiliness for that matter, is something that she then specifically discarded. And that's why we don't see it in the Butcher Boys. So you can look at these works, and this is now a grave generalization as some kind of a process of elimination. The same with the figures Untitled. I mean, that figure is so repulsive that there is no real other response possible to it, different from the Butcher Boys, where the repulsion is sort of balanced by sympathy and so on and so on. And then the Municipal Crucifix, that bears a striking kind of a visual resemblance to it, and those figures are not, they're actually really not a unit. So exactly like the three figures in the Butcher Boys, they don't talk to one another. They don't, they don't really relate to one another. That kind of thing is a strong register of what Siegel and the international movement of that time mandated. You must also understand that art teaching at that time in South Africa was very strongly internationally oriented, and local South African examples were very, very seldom used. And I must assume that Jane Alexander had sources of exposure that is not apparent from the literature. And what I am referring to is Pfeffer, who then goes and explores the second source of figuration, where this hybrid figure was slowly developed, mostly by black artists in the 1970s and in the 1980s. Okay, so that is why those two articles are important. Pfeffer situates the Butcher Boys and the art of Jane Alexander in general, but I'm not really so much interested in Jane Alexander in general. I'm just interested in the Butcher Boys. He situates that in a certain tradition of figuration that is uniquely South African. It may be that his delineation of that tradition is very narrow, maybe too narrow, but that's a debate for another day. And what Big does is she actually takes the works that Alexander made before that time to show her creative process and how it unfolded and how it culminated in the Butcher Boys. I would assume one could go then further as to what happened after that, but that is not really our concern. Okay. Now you will get about 15 questions from these two sources. Okay. Don't overcomplicate it. The Pfeffer reads very easily. It's after all history. The Tenley-Bick is more, for a lack of a better word, philosophical, I suppose, theoretical, and so on and so on. But as far as the theoretical and the philosophical is concerned, in that article, we will definitely not go down that route specifically in choosing the questions that we have selected. Okay. The other focus is, of course, on the work of Zanele Mooli. All right. And there, by far, the most important article, and the one that you should really be on top of, is the one by Kylie Thomas. Okay. Now, we've spoken about it last week, and there are some particular interesting notions and so on that comes out of it and so on. It is really quite self-explanatory. It's not a particularly difficult article to come to terms with, and perhaps here it's not a bad idea to just give you a few pointers as to what reading really is. Mostly when people read academic articles, they have an incorrect expectation of total recall. And that means that they get very angry and cross with themselves if they don't remember what they have read. Well, if you don't remember anything, then of course you have a problem. But you should remember something, and therefore the only way to really get on top of an article is to read it a couple of times. And the second time you read it, it will be much, much quicker. And the third time will be even more quicker. And then, of course, it would be most helpful for you if you approach your reading with certain questions that you want to ask answered. Okay. That is what sets research in general apart from information gathering. Okay, this is now really, you can go and listen to the earlier contact sessions where we have said this and so on and so on. So if you approach the reading with a sense of, with a sense of direction, then you know what to read for, and you can immediately pick it up when you get to the portions where it is dealt with and so on. So obviously, when you look at this article, you can deduce from the title of the article, Intimate Archive, Photography, and Post-Apartheid Lesbian Lives. Now, each of those are key words. There is no other way of actually looking at it. Okay, so what is an intimate archive? You know, what does she say about photography, for instance? Why does she connect post-apartheid with lesbian? That's very interesting conflation that she makes. And I think if you approach the reading from that kind of perspective, you will then easily be able to answer what is meant by an intimate archive. What is the metaphoric significance of photography, for instance, and what is its relationship to other issues like naturalism and realism and human identity and the use of images today and portraiture and stuff like that. It all will flow from this discussion of photography. Post-apartheid is a term that unfortunately is very heavily labored with racial connotations. So clearly you should see a question mark popping up there about, in other words, post-apartheid race and lesbian. Okay, how does she connect the two? What have the two have to do with one another and so on? Okay, now there, I think the way she uses the term post-apartheid may be just a designation of sort of artwork that became possible after our democratic dispensation kicked in. Okay, now why would that be the case? You can, this is again where general knowledge comes in and your own experience of things that have happened in this country, perhaps not in your lifetime, but very near to your own lifetime. We had a constitution that assigned certain absolute fundamental rights to every person. That's what it says. It doesn't say man or woman or whatever, and it says person. So what kind of a person is a lesbian person? What kind of a person are these persons who designate themselves as LGBTIQ+, which, as I understand, is now the more acceptable acronym for them. Yeah, you know, do they in fact designate themselves as men or women? What does it really matter? That's the issue. Is so-called gender labeling so important that we are completely guided by it, or not? Okay, and yeah, if you concentrate on these four sources, I can assure you, you will be able to answer each and every one of the questions that we pose in the exam. Okay. So yeah, it would be great if we could run through the answers of all the assignments in Tutorial 101. No, it maybe would be great, but I do think you know that what you've been given is more than sufficient. To my mind, that is where it comes to spoon feeding. You were in any case spoon fed when you received your report on assignments 1 and 3, because all of that what you want is perhaps there, maybe just not the argument, but the arguments can only highlight some of those questions and their lack of clarity. I have a question here about exam scope. I don't know what the word exam scope means. It's as simple as that. The whole content of assignments and e-reserves. This is another one who hasn't read any of the study material. Now wants it reduced to 4 sentences. Answers from assignment 3 and other MCQ questions. Yep, we're dealing with that as on the one side. And in any case, this was a very valuable intervention by one of the students because we eliminated those questions that were problematic as per our last discussion. Yeah, then here's I don't know if this is a question. Queer knowledge and politics. Okay, I think the problem here is really the notion of queer politics. I mean, of queer knowledge. Sorry. Anything that happens in the public eye, in a public space, whatever you wish to call it, the strange amorphous domain we call public is by its very nature potentially political. Okay. So the word politics must be understood as something that is far wider than just so-called belonging to a political party and listening to the inane propaganda on television, for instance. Queer knowledge is, of course, it's not that it is a new epistemology, although there are some people who would claim those things for it. But it really stems from the notion that as part of feminist critique of Western thinking, we accept that the thinking in the Western world is highly gendered. And it is highly gendered and biased in favor of the way men would think about things, and because it is so gendered and biased towards men, it has the function of keeping men in power. It's as simple as that. It's a very banal argument, but it is fairly incontestable, at least in broad strokes. Queer knowledge then refers to the discourse that was almost completely absent before the 1990s, and it very seldom before that really surfaced, although we are aware historically that there were always people in history, and some that played a significant role, who can be very easily fit under this LGBTI community designation and so on. And the effort of incorporating them and their experience and their responses and their ideas and so on into the mainstream of certainly art theory and then maybe philosophy, and this thing we can call our mental picture of the world is something that they would strive for. In other words, it's a validation of their unique experience. Okay, so that is what the notion queer knowledge refers to. Okay, semester 2, assignment 3, questions and answers. Okay. Then the most important aspect to look for in the examinations, especially when preparing for the exam. Yeah, I wonder, okay, I've given you the 4 most important sources. I've explained to you that the questions will be sort of bundled into focusing on the study unit 1 and on Alexander and on Moholy. What more is there to do? Then here's another mysterious one, butcher boys. Yep, go and read about butcher boys in Pfeffer and in Bic. Okay, then I have the title of the article here, Horror Histories, Apartheid and the Abject Body in the Work of Jane Alexander. What about it? I think I've spoken about it. Van der Vlies, queer knowledge. We've spoken about queer knowledge and the politics of the gays in contemporary South African photography. In fact, if you read the the article by Thomas, okay, and the references to photography as a medium, you will pick up what the significance of photography is, and certainly what the significance of photography is in terms of the politics of the gaze. Now, what does the politics of the gaze refer to? That is very nicely explained by Van der Vlies. And what it really refers to is the following, that we in the Western tradition have a very strong tradition of center division and of gender division, because through the ages, and it is only changed now over the last 50 years or so perhaps, I'm not aware what goes on in other cultures, but I would imagine there's something like this as well. And what I mean by as well, and that is that the contribution made by women have been denigrated and so on and so on. Now, in this way of seeing, of course, there are certain assumptions that are made, namely that the person producing the image is a male person, and the ones consuming the image or viewing the image would also be a male person. And if it is not a male person, it's only really the male person's a perception of that is really of importance, and so on. Now, when you actually look at art, you see in the West one of its dominant subject matter is the female nude, and you ask yourself now, what is this? What is a bunch of empowered men doing and looking at passive images of naked women? Immediately what springs to mind is this picture of control, and the women are incapable of really responding. They are just mute. They are passive. They are not participants. They are simply there to be gazed at, and that gazing then becomes emblematic of their passivity and of the fact that they are being controlled and that their bodies are being gazed at purely for the pleasure of the male viewer. Now, clearly, that is a tradition that is pernicious, and it has to be dealt with by the artists such as Zanele Moholi, who is a self-designated member of the LGBTI community. Okay, so what is her stance about the male gaze? Is there something like a female gaze? Is there a gaze that is neutral, or whatever the case may be? The essence of this is that the gaze, whether it's the male gaze, because that is really what the gaze is a male gaze, constructs a power relationship. It defines about who is the powerful subject and who is the powerless subject. And nobody speaks on behalf of the powerless and the voiceless. And yet here is Zanele Moholi. She uses photography as a medium, which is perhaps one of the most naturalistically inclined mediums, and so on. And she exposes another way of gazing at these people. She evokes their stories. She tried to convey their own experiences, and she also suggests sometimes the standard incorrect response that depictions like that then provokes. So she really forces us as the spectators to really look at these images and to ask the simple human questions, such as, is this a person? Is this a human being? Are they protected by our Constitution? Do they have valid experiences, and so on and so on? Those are the things. And asking those things is to act as if you are part of the political domain. Okay, so that's the politics of the gaze. Okay, principles of interpreting art. There it is. Study guide, study unit number 1. There they all are. It's important that you understand the term principles as guideline. Okay, please turn your mic off. Okay. Okay, I see 2 blue rings flashing. Okay, thank you. You should understand the notion of principles as in the way that it is suggested in the study guide, namely, it's really guidelines. Okay, the first 2 guidelines. The first one is all artworks have aboutness and demand interpretation. That is a guide to you, the viewer. It says that, okay? It says here you are in front of an artwork, what it is about. It's as simple as that. The second one is that interpretations should comply with certain criteria and so on and so on. And yeah, now it may be true that there are other ways of looking at things, but I think I'm not trying to teach you other ways of looking at things. I'm trying to teach you of a way to look at contemporary art. Okay, and then the rest is really things that you can apply. You read the guideline and you say to yourself, okay, this is what it means. Okay, and then you go and you apply it to the artwork in front of you. For instance, my favorite guideline is the one about relevance, coherence, and inclusivity. Now, each of those words means something. If something is relevant, it has to do with the artwork in front of you. It is for you to articulate what it has to do with the artwork in front of you. In order for you to do that, you must have itemized the aboutness of the artwork. In other words, you have to take the elements, and this is not just formal elements, you have to take the elements of the artwork and then formulate the associated meanings and stuff with it, and so on and so on. Then coherence it's really another word for being logical. In other words, whatever you say must logically or reasonably stick together. Okay, that's why it is important to discuss artworks and so on and so on. And inclusivity means that you leave obvious things out of an interpretation. Okay, a banal example is if you look at an installation on an artwork and the centerpiece is a donkey, you have to deal with a donkey. You have to articulate what it is about. That would be the aspect of inclusivity. There are sometimes very brilliant interpretations of very small detail of an artwork, and where it fails is exactly on this guideline of inclusivity and so on. And it is the same if you take inclusivity and you take a well-known artwork like the Butcher Boys. Please take my word for it. You can't pontificate about what the Butcher Boys mean if you have not, in fact, become familiar what other people have written about it, because that is what constitutes the informed discourse of the artwork. Okay. Break down important points and ideas in difficult readings that are relevant to the exam. I think I've done that to the extent that I would want to. understand of art and formalism. Yeah, formalism is a very confined way of looking at art. It's really an attempt to try and understand the aesthetic core of things. But there are many artworks today that have very precious little aesthetic impact on or features to them. I mean, the case in point would be, in fact, the Butcher Boys. I defy you to write a formalistic analysis of the Butcher Boys. Clearly, formalism may be helpful in certain cases, and it may be it may be relevant in looking at some of Moholi's portraiture, okay, because there things like balance and lighting and form and space and that kind of thing comes into play, but that is never the totality of the experience of art. So yes, formalism is valid in certain instances, but it is simply never sufficient in itself. Yeah, answer some questions students might have. I think I've been trying to do that, or guide us in a direction that make the exams easier. Okay, I suppose you want the 45 questions. Okay, unfortunately I can't give that to you and have a job by Monday, so I think we'll have to skip that one. Okay, and then go over past papers, blah, blah, blah. I'm not doing that. Okay, so that I think more or less deals with all your questions. You must also understand that what you are experiencing now is you're simply, driven by a sort of a flush of adrenaline and stress, and you're expecting the worst kind of difficult exam paper and so on. It is not. It is not like that. We who are involved in teaching this module take no joy whatsoever in failing students or seeing students fail. That's not what we are here for. The purpose, more or less. Okay, now what is a spotlight for everyone? You will highlight this video for everyone in the meeting. Cancel. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, it's not that I am dismissive of your concerns. I'm only saying no. It's simply that I really do think that, as far as I can understand your concerns, I have more than adequately been expressed. There comes a point where you have to accept that this is a university, and you also have to start developing your own intuition. You have to build the confidence to navigate in among all these ideas and theories and aspects, form your own arguments based on evidence, and this is the beginning of that process. For me, the value of these two sessions was exactly to have highlighted, mostly for my benefit, those questions that are perhaps not best to repeat, and they have all been eliminated from the examination. Okay. Right. That's what I want to say. Any comment or remark you wish to make? Any question you wish to ask? Okay, I don't see anything flashing. Right, I am reminding you of the session that will also be recorded, I guess, on the Invigilator app at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Just visit my UNISA to make sure of the time. I may not be entirely correct about it. And yeah, if there is really a specific and pressing issue that you wish to discuss with me before the exam on the 7th, then please give me a call and we can then deal with it telephonically. Okay, righto. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.